how you're going to achieve your energy transition objectives, and that's why financing is not making its way. So during Sharm el-Sheikh, we put together a guidebook. It's called the Sharm el-Sheikh Guidebook for Just Financing. And under the word just financing, we said it's not just the quantity of financing, but the quality, i.e., the feasibility studies, creating the infrastructure among personnel and staff in government and the private ecosystem to be able to always have a pipeline of projects, and therefore you can leverage on the existing financing that happens. So in your initiative, when I read about it, again, it's a way to create that quality finance, i.e. the TA or the capacity building that is required across. I mean, just to conclude, there's so much that we can speak about, that we put together, and you will hear this concept a lot in the G20 and at COP, and it's coming up again, is country platforms. Countries need to put together a country platform for climate action. We created a country platform. It's called the Nexus of Water, Food and Energy. NWFE, in Arabic, Nuwafi, means fulfilling pledges. So it came from pledges and implementation. And we've been very clear with a set of projects. It's in line with our national 2050 climate strategy. And we say, these are the projects, this is how much we're putting public money, and this is how much we need from the international community, i.e. the IFIs, to finance private sector. And we had debt swap for climate action within the country platform. So you always hear that, and as we go to Brazil, country platforms are becoming very, very, more countries want to do them. We're helping Tanzania and other countries do their own country platform. It has to be country-led. It has to be according to your objectives. You have to be clear about the NDCs. You have to be clear about projects, and it's not only mitigation, but also adaptation is there, because that's also one of the areas of climate action. I can go on for a very long time, but two things to bear in mind. Climate finance exists. It's not too much, but it's up to the country to be clear with its projects. Quality finance means that we need sustainability, and i.e. technical assistance and capacity building in countries. And finally, country platforms do work. So I advise every country to have a country platform and a governance structure for it, so that you can attract whether it's FDI or concessional finance and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful. Thank you. And since we're on the topic of climate finance, there's been so much discussion around it, and yet when it comes to like the tangibility of what that's translated into on ground, it's been relatively limited. So, being not just public leaders, but also elected officials, one of the things that I grapple with is the risk that comes with both committing to jobs as well as mobilizing finance. In the reality of what we see today, especially political leaders, they face that trade-off, is how much do we actually invest in energy transition, how much do we invest in climate change given those risks? How do you navigate that?
I'll talk from the public investment side. Any public money that goes into a project, this project has to be part of whether it's Vision 2030 or a national plan, which is ratified from Parliament. So that's a very important governance and political agency or buy-in, as you mentioned. The second point is, given that fiscal space is quite tight anyways, and we've been facing so many headwinds, not necessarily tailwinds, you want to put, for example, if I'm talking about renewable energy, wind and solar, do you have enough investments in the grid to upload this renewable energy? So the government has to be very clear with its priorities. I'll put investments in the grid, allowing private sector to generate the wind and solar, and this is what's going to create private sector jobs, skilling, greening, and also an entrepreneurial ecosystem sometimes, which does the measurement for the CO2 and so forth. So it's a matter of clarity with the objectives, a very constructive dialogue and understanding when it comes to those who ratify these plans, which is Parliament, which represents people and governorates and so forth. And then finally, what creates the continuous buy-in is that the projects get implemented, so people can see that the energy transition or the climate action is not just a burden on development, but it's part of development. Because each and every energy project, in addition to creating jobs, creates green capacity for more industrialization, for more economic activity. So it's very important to create the overall narrative, and there's so much work that has been written since Glasgow, actually, on the importance of thinking about climate action and development as inseparable. They are not mutually exclusive. It's not either or, and that is something that needs to be continued and pushed. I don't know the issue of yesterday and the announcement of yesterday, how consequential that would be on the multilateral development banks, on the dialogue around climate. Are we going to go back? So it's you know, it's very strange that today is the first day of Davos, but yesterday this happened. So I think you know, how far in terms of creating disturbance in a path which look to be moving forward with gains for developing countries, and also better understanding for the multilateral development banks and the global institutions that do provide financing. I don't know. Let's see how that works out. I don't have an answer. All of us do have questions.
Nobody does.
Yeah, exactly. I said nobody has.
I think from the state perspective, the question that we've been asking is how do you go from mine to energy? We have the entire value chain, the ecosystem. How do you build it out? And how do you create consistency in policies? So if you look at India's view, is that how do we bring every bit of our ecosystem? So if you look at rooftop solar to agriculture being solarized, then to the entire green hydrogen, which seems to be the buzzword, and various investments coming into that sector, green steel. So I think, at least from India's context, is to set the policy straight. Yes, there are some subsidies required, but it's not over and beyond the fiscal challenges that any state or the federal government would have. That's one part. But the second part again is how do you make this the transition political resistant or resistant to politics, right? And that's going. And as a HRD minister, my focus is how do I create the next set of jobs that we don't even know in exactly which area they're going to come. So working with the industry, working with NGOs, collaborating with them, getting the curriculum, the whole 9 yards, and creating the next wave of jobs, I think is going to be very, very important to make it more resistant.
Thank you. I'm being mindful of time, and I'll request one piece, which is this is a conversation. So if you have one question, thought, insight from participants, I know there's folks at the back as well. Would welcome that before we shift on to the next conversation series.
So basically, as we discussed, lots of like the focus on mitigation globally as well as in India, and the resources, particularly financial resources allocated for the adaptation are very less. At the same time, like communities are facing lots of challenges because of the climate change, and not only this issue is related to just transition, but it is very bigger. Because of the climate change, lots of people, as far as migrant workers, and many of them are getting. So, and the just how we can broadening the just transition definition in that context.
Thank you. Do you want to just 30 seconds short? Sure.
Yeah, well, I would have one question towards you. I found it very interesting what you were saying with creating the new job opportunities, which I think is great and is needed. I'd like to go on the topic of the next generations. We have a massive swift, between the generations that are currently in the power positions and the ones that are coming. And I'll be very honest with you, I am one from these generations. We don't believe many things that are said because it's very often the same thing. It's said. How are you going to tackle this problem of transparency and trust that is existing towards like all of these promises and all of these COPs and WEFs and etc. etc. It's nice, but yeah, I don't see the results. I'm sorry. Don't want to be rude here, but yeah, I'd be interested in that.
I think that's a valid question. Before I come to you, I think the way we're looking at it as a state is how do you incentivize farmers? How do you Honorable Prime Minister's program, Suryaghar, which is rooftop solar for every house, that's the exact PPA, power purchase agreement we're doing with every citizen. And I think that's one of the simple mechanisms that we can create the incentive structure for greater adoption. Two, see, to be fair, India is seen, and for every country to really become a developed nation, low cost of energy is going to be critical. So between solar, wind, and pump storage hydro, as of today, I don't know PSP where it will be in the next 5 years, currently is viable. So at about 4 and 5 rupees a unit in Indian rupees, it actually makes sense. So I think tying the entire incentive structure, I think is going to be very, very critical in that sense. Coming to your point, yes, I think a lot of promises have been made. The Honorable Minister has also made very clear in the opening remarks. But I think time has come. I mean, look at what's outside. This is probably the greenest DAVOS that we have seen. Last night, that's the whole discussion we were having. Things are changing. So we have to adapt to it. Otherwise, we will have tougher challenges. And if you look at natural calamities, it is going up. And insurance companies are running out of money. So we have to translate. So I think politicians are to be partially blamed for it. Creating the vibrant ecosystem to enable it. So for me, what's exciting is mind to energy, and capturing the entire value of the ecosystem, and understanding the role of human resource development, the role of real-time governance in the entire ecosystem. That, I believe, can enable India to leapfrog as a nation. Because we don't have a lot of the legacy issues that other countries have. So we never went through a personal computing phase. We just went to the smartphone phase. So I think this, even in energy, there's a potential to leapfrog. Our grids can be far more robust. And Government of India mindfully is spending substantial amount of money building the entire grid connectivity. And so I think that should solve both sides of the coin.
I just want to say that adaptation is on the agenda. And for example, one of the outcomes of also COP27 was the Loss and Damage Fund, realizing that desertification and what's happening, because that's in sub-Saharan Africa mainly. But one important aspect is dialogue among countries, and also showing success cases where adaptation was taken as a focus, and there were alternative financing tools, like what's happening in Colombia in terms of debt swap agreements, Barbados, the same. So we need to shed light in discussions on what worked, and not just what worked, how did it work? So that can also be politicians in other areas, in other countries, with concrete examples that it's not just a promise, but it has happened elsewhere. What do I need to do to make sure and scale? So this word scaling we always hear about, is to take a successful example and see how we can, of course, not one size fits all, but problems are the same, and when one solution works, why not try to replicate given the initial conditions in the country? In terms of trust, I think that's well said, that it's everywhere, and I think the shocks that are facing us today are more frequent and bigger, and whether it's the fiscal space that is available for countries to be able to take action, which shock should I prioritize given the fiscal, the very tight fiscal space. So it's I mean, the credibility gap that exists can only be narrowed through better communication. And I think that's an element which there's always areas of improvement. There's no best communication. There's always scope to improve the communication. I think social media plays a very big role, and being mindful to the different generations is also important, and including them in the dialogues. I think for COP, there's also the youth dialogue at the COP level, and the different initiatives related to startups and SMEs in the climate space for adaptation. In Egypt, for instance, we have farmers today that are using solar panels to, instead of diesel, for action for adaptation. Sometimes loans, low cost, and so forth. And being very honest on what doesn't work and what cannot.
No. Yes. sentiment towards energy transition remains strong. And while there are turbulent times coming up, I'm pretty confident that we'll be okay. That being said, we'll close the session on government perspectives. And Vikas, actually move to you. What does energy transition?
Thank you, Ritvika. Thank you so much. You stole a bit of my thunder in terms of how I was going to introduce this, but thank you. Morning, everyone. Thank you for making it today to this session. My name is Vikas Mehta. I am the Executive Director of Z Fund. Z Fund is a venture and a philanthropy fund focused on renewable energy and we're based in the Netherlands. We have folks representing renewable energy companies. The first one on further left, I have Vaishali Nigam Sinha. She's a Chief Sustainability Officer and co-founder of Renew Power, which is one of India's largest. My left, the Director of Indica Renewables, a diversified renewable energy company in Indonesia. So Vaishali, if I can come to you, jump to the question, which is that we heard from Lokesh and Dr. Rania about the government perspective on what they're doing for the policy for their states and for the countries that they represent. But I just want to understand from your perspective at Renew Power that how do you see the policy environment in India, whether it's at the federal or the central level or the state level, with regards to the pace and scale of RE growth?
Thanks so much, and congratulations on this event. I think it's a very well orchestrated conversation. I want to start by saying that a question was asked on, we hear a lot of these conversations at COP and DAVOS, but what's happening on the ground? I must say, you must come to India and see what's going on, because we've been in India before that, but the business started about 13, 14 years ago. I think it's been a parallel journey with India's renewable energy growth. And I think when you have a leader with a vision, and leaders, if I could say, even in the state of Andhra Pradesh, just within months of coming into power, I must congratulate the government for coming up with a robust, integrated plan for renewables, green hydrogen, which really sends a messaging. I mean, we're talking about a messaging in the United States of pulling out, but then it's if they don't follow, you need followers to, right? Let's not make leaders who must not be leaders. In the first stint of President Trump, we saw that the world continued. And continued like what? And we are in a much better space. So sometimes I do feel it's important for us to step back and take stock of where we are. If I look at a decade, deployment on the ground has grown 6 times. In 2014-15, we had about 13 gigawatts of assets on the ground. We have 200 gigawatts. In 2019, we were at around 50, but now we're going to do 50 gigawatts year on year. So that is the kind of progress we see. And why has that happened? That's happened, if I could come back, we have a vision, we have a commitment to the sector. We have the desire to engage with the world in a positive way. I think that by the International Solar Alliance, by the ambitious commitments at the COP, all of this is really important for us in the private sector, because when our government representatives come back, it's very easy to have a conversation on the gaps which exist for us to accelerate the pace on the ground. So I feel that I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, and I'm positive just because of what I see happening in my own country. We have the largest grid, as you mentioned, which really is a game changer. We have SECI, which is a nodal agency, which sort of increases transparency and increases our ability to deploy in a more transparent way, and so on and so forth. So at an institutional level, I see in India, there's a huge amount of progress and commitment which has happened. When we started Renew, the company I represent, we had knocked about 60 doors in 2011, 60 investors globally. And we had one investor who invested in our story. Because people were like, oh, wind turbines, high net worth individual investment destination, what are they going to do? This model for solar, wind, hydro, pumped hydro, and a lot of innovation around how we can leverage these individual sources of clean energy and innovate in a complex way to look at round-the-clock generation, etc., etc. So I'm not sure if this gives you a sense that at a central level there's huge amount of commitment, and at the state level there's a huge amount of commitment by many, but not all. So the question is, how can we bring that? How can we work on that to ensure there is a central and a state level sort of alignment for us to do more, right? And as I said, the Andhra Pradesh government is doing a great job, and we look forward to working with many other states in the country. And then the alignment at the global level at these events is just a kind of a teaser for us to go back in our own countries, and when the government interacts with the private sector, and then we work with communities on the ground as well to make things happen. We probably see the positive change we've seen over the last decade in India.
Thank you, Vishali. Thank you so much. You know what, my selfish takeaways from what you just said are two, which is you mentioned the grid modernization and you mentioned the round-the-clock power. Two components which are absolutely essential when we talk about the integration of RE into the grid, and of course having, how do you tackle the intermittency of the grids themselves, of the RE itself. So it is great to see the commitment from not just the government, but also agencies like SETI and Renew Power, which have also been part of those round-the-clock bids. So thank you for that. Pakashaf, if I can turn to you right now to give us a perspective from Indonesia. How have you seen the federal and the provincial policies shape up, especially if I can ask you since the announcement of the JETP 2 years ago? How have you really seen a company like which is very diversified in terms of its RE portfolio? How have you seen the policies in the country play out?
Thank you. Very good morning. So my name is Arshad Rashid. I'm the president of Indica Energy. It's an integrated energy company out of Indonesia.